What is the strangest mystery that is still unsolved? The USS Cyclops, a coal ship, disappeared with 306 men, the largest US Navy loss of life that didn't involve combat. Full stop. Who was Perseus? From 1943 to 1946, the Soviet Union had a higher-level spy in the Manhattan Project, codenamed Perseus. This spy was a scientist at the White Sands missile testing site in NM and the main research facilities in Los Alamos. Perseus saw pretty much the entire project start to finish, giving the Russians everything they needed to get to work on their own bomb. The fact that they were able to do so within 4 years of the end of World War II when their nations were still devastated is proof positive that Perseus helped a great deal. And to top it all off, Perseus was never caught or positively identified. Which of the 3 astronauts aboard Apollo 10 was responsible for the floating turd? This is my favorite weird and barely known one. Back in 2013, an unknown group assaulted a power substation in California. By all appearances it was pretty sophisticated, scouted firing positions, all casings wiped of prints. They targeted transformers so they'd take time to overheat before triggering any alarms. Also knew exactly when the police would arrive. No suspect or motive to this day. They also cut some fiber optic cables in a vault nearby. Conspiracy types think it was a dry run by Russia or possibly China to see how effective an attack like that might be. Asher degree. Girl leaves her house in the middle of the night during a storm and disappeared. The only problem is that she was terrified of thunder and lightning and had no motive for leaving because her home life was fine. Then her clothes and backpack were found a year later in an abandoned construction site. The whereabouts of the last Gestapo chief Heinrich Müller. The last verified sighting of him was in Berlin roughly 3 days before it fell. He had stated he knew full well what the Russians did to prisoners and he had no intentions of being captured. As chief of the Gestapo, he more than likely had access to foreign documents as well as ways to replicate them. Both the CIA and the KGB spent time looking for him, but no trace has ever been found. Nice try, Netflix. You have to find interesting unsolved mysteries yourself. Oh god. Here I go on another 2 hours binge of reading every comment in the thread. The boat's void is a region of outer space that contains no galaxies or stars and we don't know why. The guy's motive for shooting up all those people in Vegas. That guy who ran away from the airport hopped the fence and was never seen again. As someone from Chicago who loves our unresolved mystery would say, there, max headroom broadcast signal intrusion, and I don't think we will ever find out who was behind it. It's been over 30 years and we still have no idea who was behind that incredibly bizarre hijack. There was a thread, a cute a while ago of someone that thought they had figured it out. That seemed very possible, but it was updated and they were ruled out as suspects. Here is the infamous video, for those that have never seen it. The Artemim Shud case, also known as the mystery of the Summerton Man, is an unsolved case of an unidentified man found dead at 6:30 am. The 1st of December 1948, on the Somerton Parker Beach, just south of Adelaide, South Australia. The case is named after the Persian phrase Artemim Shud, meaning ended or finished, which was printed on a scrap of paper found months later in the fob pocket of the man's trousers. The scrap had been torn from the final page of a copy of Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, authored by 12th century poet Omar Khayyam. Artemima was misspelled as Artemina in many early reports, and this error has often been repeated, leading to confusion about the name in the media. That one time when the PM of Australia went to the beach. The Salish Sea Feet, or the Mad Axemen of New Orleans. The Salish Sea Feet are the approximately 20 dismembered feet found in or around British Columbia or Washington, USA. The feet sometimes are found still inside of shoes. No one knows how they got there or where they came from. Over the course of the last 13 years, the authorities have ruled out foul play. The Mad Axeman of New Orleans ran rampant in 1918 and 1919. He murdered 6 people, usually those of Italian descent, with axes or straight razors. In March of 1919, he sent a lengthy letter from hottest hell that was pretty nonsensical, but the most relevant paragraphs read, now, to be exact, at 12:15 earthly time, On next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well, then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it out on that specific Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. There were no murders that night because every dance hall in NOLA was filled to capacity. 3 lighthouse workers with impeccable mustaches traveled to a remote island on the 7th of December, 1900 for a lighthouse shift that should have lasted for 2 weeks. When a boat arrived to pick them up, they were gone. No trace of the bodies, and the lighthouse was strangely locked. Not only was the setting normal, meal ready to be served, but there was no fire in the fireplace, and the clock stopped. One of the men kept a log in a diary, and he said that the seas were rough one day, but when monitored, it was actually calm. No one knows what happened to them. Source 2 skip to 443. Edit. The mustaches have nothing to do with the story at all. I just really liked them. How TF Jesus found people in the Middle East named Mark, Matthew, Luke, AD and John. The Conca La Pass in Ladakh. This region lies in the disputed border of India and China, and is truly the most inaccessible places in the world. In 1962, the armies of both the countries were engaged in a severe conflict. After this, both China and India entered into an agreement according to which none will be allowed to patrol the region, but can keep an eye on it from a distance. After this, popular belief floated that the Conca La Pass in Ladakh is a hideous base of UFOs. The area has forever remained a no man's land due to its territorial limits and is the reason why the UFOs have chosen it as their operational base. Reportedly, many have seen these UFOs and both the Indian and Chinese governments are aware of these developments. In 2006, Google Maps 2 baffled the world with some images that looked like military facilities, but till date the whole issue remains mysterious and unexplainable. MV Joyita. More than barnacle growth high above the usual waterline on the port side showed that Joyita had been listing heavily for some time. More than there was some damage to the superstructure. A flying bridge had been smashed away and the deck house had light damage and broken windows. A canvas awning had been rigged on top of the deck house behind the bridge. More than Joyita carried a dinghy and 3 Kali life rafts. 3, but all were missing. She did not carry enough life jackets for everyone on board. 7. More than the starboard engine was found to be covered by mattresses, while the port engine's clutch was still partially disassembled, showing that the vessel was still running on only one engine. More than an auxiliary pump had been rigged in the engine room, mounted on a plank of wood slung between the main engines. However, it had not been connected. More than the radio on board was tuned to the international distress channel, but when the equipment was inspected, a break was found in the cable between the set and the aerial. The cable had been painted over, obscuring the break. This would have limited the range of the radio to about 2 miles, 3.2 km. More than the electric clocks on board, wired into the vessel's generator, had stopped at 10:25 and the switches for the cabin lighting and navigation lights were on, implying that whatever had occurred happened at night. The ship's logbook, sextant, mechanical chronometer and other navigational equipment, as well as the firearms Miller kept in the boat, 7, were missing. Fourth, and a doctor's bag was found on deck, containing a stethoscope, a scalpel, and 4 lengths of blood-stained bandages. The identity of and what happened to D.B. Cooper. A man on a plane called himself D.B. Cooper and claimed to have a bomb in his suitcase. He took the flight crew hostage, and when he got the money he asked for, he had the flight crew start flying again. Eventually he jumped out of the plane with a couple of parachutes and the money. No one knows where he went or if he even survived. At the start of lots of chapters of the Quran there are mysterious groups of letters. No one knows what they mean, although there are lots of theories. In 1977 we received a radio signal from outer space that lasted about 72 seconds. To this day, we still do not know where it originated from. In 1994, close to 100 school children, 60 on record, described seeing a disc-shaped craft land behind their school during morning break time in Ruwa, Zimbabwe. Many of them interacted with beings that fit the grey alien description, with the children receiving what is described as some sort of telepathic communication. They all still stick to their stories today. Example 1, Example 2, Example 3. Here is the original footage of the interviews with the kids at the school. 30 mins. Why people keep pouring money into a hole in the ground on Oak Island? If you ask me, more than less than. Flight 19 of the 5th of December, 1945. 5-bomber craft on a routine training run became lost while heading back and eventually disappeared entirely. Audio has them saying that they thought they had ended up over the Florida Keys, but wind could not have allowed that. Even more interesting is the fact the rescue craft dispatched to locate them also disappeared. Death of Ray Rivera. Found dead in a meeting room in a hotel. Fell through the roof. The last call he received was from his office, but the company placed all employees under a gag order so no one can talk to police. Where the duck are all the 10mm sockets going into hiding? Possibly an underground city just for them? The 1987 Arkansas murders of Don Henry and Kevin Ives. Albert Johnson, the Mad Trapper of Rat River. A pretty cool, mostly forgotten story about a man chased by the RCMP through the north. Why did they stop making the grooved Nerf turbo football? The cancer paradox. It's about creatures like elephants and blue whale and how they don't get cancer when they should be more prone to it. Edit. Holy thanks for 2k upvotes. I will forever post about my great aunt when these come up. Where is Kimberly Langwell? She disappeared in 1999 in Beaumont, Texas. Her car was found in the parking lot of an Eckerd's drugstore, but her purse and keys were missing. Her cell phone was inside. We all know she wouldn't have left her daughter, Tiffany, just like that. She loved her and loved life and those who surrounded her. Everyone who knew Kimberly loved her. She was the shining star on a dark night. If you have seen her alive, please call the police. I have posted her case below. Who killed Jeffrey Epstein? Ken McElroy's murder. This Dow Checano terrorized an entire town until the town decided that they had enough, and then somebody shot him in broad daylight in front of a bunch of witnesses. To be fair, he probably deserved it. But what makes it interesting is that everyone claims to have had their eyes closed or be tying their shoe at the time or something, so oh boy, I wish I could help officer, but I didn't see anything. On the 19th of April, 1995, a truck bomb detonated outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The explosion killed 168 in what was the deadliest terrorist attack on the United States until 9/11 to date. It still remains the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in the country. One of the lesser known things about this is the case of the missing leg. Investigators discovered the leg laying among the rubble and identified it belonging to Lokisha Levy. The only problem was, she'd already been buried with both her legs. She was exhumed. Her severed leg was placed in her coffin while the other leg was taken to the FBI laboratory for identification. Since it had been embalmed, DNA sample was unable to be obtained. The extra left leg, which had been mistakenly buried with Levy, is suspected to belong to an unidentified 169th victim, whose body had mostly disintegrated in the blast. This has led people to suspect there was an additional terrorist involved, even though perpetrators Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols had been convicted, with 2 others later identified as accomplices. So who was the possible additional bomber? They still remain unidentified now 25 years after the attack. Left square bracket. Another one is Colonel Philip Shue's death. More than on the 16th of April, 2003. 54-year-old Colonel Philip Shue left his Texas home and headed to work. 2 hours later, he was found dead in his car, an apparent victim of a car crash. The car was caved in on the driver's side and Philip suffered major head trauma as a result. He was killed instantly. This is where it gets weird. More than Philip had a tear in his t-shirt under his fatigues. There, they could see a 6-inch vertical gash in his chest. Above the entrance to the 6-os gash were at least 5 scratch marks, which the autopsy report said were consistent with hesitant marks. Both his nipples had been removed with surgical precision. The fifth digit on his left hand had been amputated and his left ear had been lacerated down to the bone. Duct tape was dangling from both of his wrists and the top of his boots. It was ruled as suicide. We still have no definitive proof of who this Socrates guy is. On one hand, he's mentioned constantly by philosophers from his time, often used as an example character, and several works are attributed to his name. On the other hand, we have countless legal records and censuses that confirm the existence of Aristotle and Plato, but none that link back to Socrates. He's either a very prolific philosopher, or an in-joke that classical philosophers would reference when they didn't know who to attribute quotes to. How her snap score went up while she's been in the shower for the past 141 weeks. A 8-year-old kid says he was killed with an axe. The kid brought them to the exact location and after some digging they found an axe and remains. The kid told the police who killed him and after interrogation he admits to killing someone. No one knows how the kid knew all this. The Oakville Blob. In 1994, there was a rainstorm in Oakville, WA. Only the raindrops were a strange clear substance that had the consistency of jello. Lots of people experienced flu-like symptoms after coming into contact with it, and people's dogs and cats all over the city were dying. When a local hospital ran a lab test on the substance after one of the patients suggested it, it was found that whatever this mysterious rain was, it had human white blood cells in it. Sometime after that, a sample was also sent to the Washington State Health Laboratory, where it was being researched by epidemiologist Mike McDowell, after he determined that it was man-made and speculated that it was some sort of matrix for transporting viruses bacteria. The samples suddenly went missing from the containment facility and his supervisor told him not to ask any questions. There are no known samples of the stuff anywhere today, despite being sent to several different facilities by various Oakville residents. So yeah, I'd personally say that this was clearly some sort of bioweapon test run. But by whom? I'd like to give the US government the benefit of the doubt here and assume it wasn't us testing something like that on our own citizens. But if it wasn't, why would it have been covered up like that? And you'd think an event like this would be a lot less obscure. Also, even if it being a bioweapon seems super obvious, how the heck did whoever dispersed it manage to make it rain over an entire city for several days? The identity of Jack the Ripper.